Welcome to Scoring Student Work for the Biology End-of-Course Exam and Collection of Evidence. The focus of this video is to provide guidance for scoring student short answer responses using rubrics. We will review one scenario, an associated question, and several student responses to that question. In this video, we will take a close look at the relationship between a scoring rubric and student responses for a short answer question. I will demonstrate the scoring process with 4 student responses for a new field study question. You will then review other student responses in the same way. The goal is to determine the number of attributes earned for each response. You should have on hand the Salmonberry plant scenario, a copy of the new field study, INQB2 question, the rubric for the question, and the student responses for the question. This packet of handouts is available on the OSPI website next to this video file. This scenario, Salmonberry plants, and associated questions were not used operationally on the Biology End-of-Course or EOC exam. The scenario set was produced for the updates for 2013 Biology EOC. Each question in the set is based on similar operational questions that assess the same item specifications. Student responses for the new field study question are based on pilot results and operational results for similar INQB2 questions. This new field study question is not found in the Salmonberry plants sample collection of evidence COE task. In the COE sample task document, questions have been added to the original scenario or modified to provide additional guidance to teachers and students. However, the training presented here can be used in preparing for either the EOC or the COE. Links to all of these documents can be found at the end of this module. Please refer to these documents throughout the presentation. You may find it helpful to take notes or mark up your copies. If you have not already done so, please pause the video and take a few minutes to read the Salmonberry plant scenario and the new field study question and write a response to the question. Write your response not as a teacher, but as a hardworking, well-taught biology student. Please do not read the rubric until after you have written your response. When you are finished, continue to view the rest of this video. Let's begin our review with the scenario. This inquiry scenario describes a field study of a living system. Inquiry scenarios can be either controlled experiments or field studies and model age-appropriate investigations. On the first page, a short paragraph provides a context for the field study. The field study question investigates a relationship between an independent or manipulated and a dependent or responding variable. A label diagram shows an overview of the field study. On the second page, a procedure lists the steps to carry out the field study provided as a numbered list. There are 2 parts to the data section: a description of the location, date, and time of the field study, as well as an environmental condition, in this case temperature, and a data table with all pertinent variables and data collected. The habitat versus number of Salmonberry plants data table has the independent or manipulated variable habitat in the far left column. There are 3 conditions of the independent or manipulated variable: forest edge, stream bank, and forest. The rest of the columns are for the dependent or responding variable, which is the number of Salmonberry plants. There are 3 columns with trial data and then an average column. The numbers in the data cells are the measurements recorded during the field study. The Plot 1 data for the forest edge habitat was recorded in Step 4 in the procedure, and the cells for the other plots were filled in as the procedure was repeated during Steps 5 and 6. The average data was collected as a part of Step 7. The procedure on this page is meant to be an exemplar for students to refer to when they reach the new procedure question. Students must be cautious to answer the new question we give them and cannot earn any credit on the new question if they copy this original procedure in its entirety. You may find it useful to use the Salmonberry plant scenario to teach the structure of an inquiry scenario to your students. Now, let's look at the new field study question. Plan a field study to answer the question in the box. You may use any materials and equipment in your procedure. Be sure your procedure includes logical steps to do the field study, conditions to be compared, data to be collected, method for collecting data, and how often measurements should be taken and recorded. Environmental conditions to be recorded. The new field study is given to the test taker inside the answer box. Field study question: how does the total rainfall in different years affect the mass of berries produced by a salmonberry plant? The word procedure shows where to start writing a new field study to answer this new question. Notice that the new independent or manipulated variable is total rainfall, and the new dependent or responding variable is the mass of berries produced by a salmonberry plant. If you are working in a group, this would be a good time to pause the video and compare your responses. Now let's look at the rubric. If you have not yet read through it, please pause the video, read all of the rubric, then resume the video. Each short answer question rubric begins with the performance description. The performance description includes the content standard from the Washington State 2009 K-12 Science Learning Standards. The content standard describes what students are expected to know. The content standard, INQB, reads, "Scientific progress requires the use of various methods appropriate for answering different kinds of research questions, a thoughtful plan for gathering data needed to answer the question, and care in collecting, analyzing, and displaying data." The performance description also includes the item specification. The item specification specifies the knowledge and abilities that are to be assessed by the question. INQB item specification 2 reads, "Describe a plan to answer a given question for a field study." Links to the Washington State 2009 K-12 Science Learning Standards and the Biology Test and Item Specifications documents can be found at the end of this video. The new field study question is scored using a set of attributes that responses can earn one by one, and those attributes are grouped together to decide how many score points a response earns. There are 7 total attributes that can be earned on this question. For the biology EOC, 6 to 7 attributes earn 2 score points. 3 to 5 attributes earn 1 score point, and 0 to 2 attributes earn 0 score points. In a COE new field study task, the same attributes are required. However, the conversion from attribute to score points is different. 6 to 7 attributes earn 4 score points. 4 to 5 attributes earn 3 score points. 3 attributes earn 2 score points. 2 attributes earn 1 score point, and 0 to 1 attributes earn 0 score points. As we look at student responses, we will tally the attributes earned. You can then use the attribute conversions for either the EOC or the COE to determine the score point. The next part of the rubric, Attributes of a Procedure for a Field Study, details the requirements to earn each attribute. The first attribute, Method for Collecting Data, has some creditable responses in an EG list. Notice that whenever the rubric is quoting possible student responses, that text is shown in italics. This list is not exhaustive, and students can use different words to express these ideas. The response must indicate that a student intentionally took a step to control some aspect of the field study to make sure that there was only one manipulated variable. Back in the original scenario, a controlled variable was the plot size. See Step 3. To earn this attribute, a response must include at least one creditable controlled variable in the procedure. The conditions to be compared attribute, also known as the independent or manipulated variable, has total rainfall in parentheses, which comes from total rainfall in the new field study question. On the 5th grade MSP, we would provide actual amounts of total rainfall for students to use, but on the 8th grade MSP and the biology EOC and biology COE, students decide how to represent those amounts. The independent or manipulated variable must have 3 conditions to be credited. Students could use 5 inches, 10 inches, 15 inches, or 1 meter, 2 meters, 3 meters, or any other amount of total rainfall that seems reasonable to them. The data to be collected attribute, also known as the dependent or responding variable, has mass of berries in parentheses, which comes from the mass of berries produced by a salmonberry plant in the new experimental question. The record measurements attribute is usually earned when a student includes a statement like, "Record the mass of the berries." This section also has 2 attribute notes. Attribute notes are further clarifications about how the attribute can be earned or not, and in some rubrics, how that attribute might impact the earning of other attributes. The observations are repeated attribute is earned when a procedure includes steps to make at least 2 observations for all of the conditions of the independent or manipulated variable. If we look back at the original scenario, this attribute would be earned by the inclusion of both Step 5 and Step 6. Most of these attributes include the text or data table if given, or something to that effect. Using a data table as part of the new field study can help earn some of the attributes. However, a data table on its own, with no other supporting steps of a procedure, will not earn any attributes and will end up with a score of 0. A data table, if included, can only help clarify language in the steps of the procedure. The record environmental conditions attribute is earned when a procedure includes the recording of at least one creditable environmental condition. If we look back at the original scenario, this attribute would be earned in Step 1, record location, date, time, and temperature. The last attribute is logical steps. The litmus test for this attribute is, are the steps clear enough that I could follow these steps and get fairly similar results to this student's results? The litmus test is not, is this a valid and reliable experiment? The third part of the rubric, General Notes, further clarifies scoring and impacts the earning of multiple attributes. General Note number 1 states, if the response does not plan an appropriate procedure for the given question, the response may not earn any of the possible attributes. The most common mistake students make on this type of item is not using the new independent or manipulated variable or the dependent responding variable that was given in the new field study question. If one of those is not used, then the response does not earn any attributes and earns a score point of 0. General Note number 1 also lists some examples of other ways a plan is not appropriate. This is not an exhaustive list. Some students repeat the original procedure from the scenario. Some only test one amount of total rainfall, so there is only one condition of the manipulated variable. Some students change amounts of total rainfall, but also change another variable like plant type, so there are 2 manipulated variables. Some students write a prediction of what will happen without giving any steps of a procedure to test their prediction. Some students write responses that are too vague to understand what the student intends. An example of naming attributes, General Note number 2, is when a student identifies the independent, dependent, and controlled variables in a list and then contradicts himself in the procedure or omits the variables from the procedure. General Note number 3 clarifies vague language in responses. Notes 3A and 3E impact whether or not the logical steps attribute can be earned. Notes 3B, 3C, and 3D help clarify some different uses of the word repeat. Note 3A is the one most commonly needed. If a response includes a vague independent or manipulated or dependent or responding variable, the response can still earn that attribute, but automatically loses the logical steps attribute. In the next several slides, you will be shown examples of student work that will demonstrate many of the ways a student can earn or not earn the attributes described in the rubric. Now, let's score some student responses. Response A. First, let's read through the student's response. 1. Go to a salmonberry habitat that gets 250 centimeters rainfall a year. Record the location, date, time, and temperature. 2. Mark a 5 by 5 meter plot. 3. Pick the berries off all the plants in the plot and record the total mass of the berries. 4. Repeat steps 1 through 3 in a salmonberry habitat that gets 500 centimeters of rainfall. 5. Repeat steps 1 through 3 in a salmonberry habitat that gets 750 centimeters. 6. Repeat steps 1 through 5 for 2 more years on the same date, time, and at the same locations. 7. Calculate the average mass of berries for each location. As I talk about how the responses are scored, the attributes will be listed on the left side, and I'll use the same colors to circle the part of the response which earns the attribute. The first thing a scorer looks for is the conditions to be compared attribute. If the response does not include the independent or manipulated variable from the new field study question given in the box, the response does not earn any attributes, so it makes sense to check for that first. Response A includes 3 conditions for the independent or manipulated variable. First, in Step 1, with 250 centimeters rainfall a year, then in Steps 4 and 5, with 500 centimeters and 750 centimeters. This response earns the conditions to be compared attribute. The next attribute a scorer looks for is the data to be collected attribute, because that also must be correct for the response to earn any of the other attributes. Response A states the dependent or responding variable in step 3 with mass of the berries and earns this attribute. Now we can look for any controlled variables to see if the response earns the method for collecting data attribute. This student included 4 creditable controlled variables in this response. In step 2, we find mark a 5 by 5 meter plot, and in step 6, we find same date, time, and same locations, so the attribute is earned. The record measurements attribute is earned in step 3 when the response says to record the responding variable. The observations are repeated attribute is earned in step 6. Repeat steps 1 through 5 for 2 more years. Remember that there needs to be at least 2 trials for all conditions of the manipulated variable. Step 6 details how to repeat trials for all 3 conditions, 250 centimeters, 500 centimeters, and 750 centimeters of rainfall. The record environmental conditions attribute is earned in step 1 with record the location, date, time, and temperature. Now we are down to our last attribute, logical steps. Remember that our litmus test for this is, are the steps clear enough that I could follow these steps and get pretty similar results to this student's results? In this response, the first 6 attributes are very clear, so the student earns the logical steps attribute. This response earns 7 attributes. Now let's look at response B. 1. Go to the forest habitat, record weather. 2. Pick 100 berries off a plant, mass the berries. 3. Find the total rain. 4. Go to the forest for 2 more years and do the same thing. The first attribute we look for is conditions to be compared. Response B includes 3 conditions for the independent or manipulated variable. This attribute is earned in a different way than we saw in response A and is unique to field studies. 2 steps of the procedure work together to provide for the 3 conditions. Step 3, find the total rain, brings in total rainfall. Step 4, for 2 more years and do the same thing, gives us 3 rainfall amounts. Although actual values for rainfall are not specified, this attribute is creditable as it is reasonable to assume that there will be 3 different amounts of rainfall in the 3 years. This response earns the conditions to be compared attribute. The dependent responding variable is found in step 2, mass the berries. This response earns the data to be collected attribute. We can now look for the 5 remaining attributes. The response does not include any controlled variables, so the method for collecting data attribute is not earned. The response does not earn the record measurements attribute. The response does not earn the observations are repeated attribute. In step 4, go to the forest for 2 more years and do the same thing, provided the second and third conditions of the independent or manipulated variable, and cannot be credited as repeating observations for each condition. The student earns the record environmental conditions attribute in step 1 with record weather. The steps of this procedure are clear enough that we could follow the steps and get pretty similar results to the student's results. Therefore, the response earns the logical steps attribute. This response earns a total of 4 attributes. Now let's look at response C. Find a plant that grows in a place with 3 foot of rainfall. Find another that grows in a place with 2 foot of rainfall, and another that grows in a place with 1 foot of rainfall. Find the amount of berries on each plant. Repeat. In response C, we first look for 3 conditions of the independent or manipulated variable. We find all 3, 3 foot of rainfall, 2 foot of rainfall, and 1 foot of rainfall. So this response earns the conditions to be compared attribute. Next, the student has included a dependent or responding variable. Find the amount of berries on each plant. However, we cannot tell what the student means by amount of berries. Amount might mean the mass of the berries, but it could also mean the number or volume of the berries. This student will earn the data to be collected attribute, but the logical steps attribute will not be earned. We could not repeat the student's procedure and get similar results as we are not sure what is meant by amount. See General Note 3A, Measuring a Vague Parameter. Now we can look for any controlled variables. This student did not include a controlled variable in the response, so the method for collecting data attribute is not earned. The response does not record any measurements, so does not earn the record measurements attribute. The next attribute to look for is observations are repeated. Notice the word repeat at the end of the procedure as a separate step. We refer to General Note 3C for guidance in how to score this. General Note 3C states, the term repeat as a separate step or in a new paragraph refers to the whole procedure. This means that this student has planned for 2 observations for all 3 conditions of the independent or manipulated variable and earns the observations are repeated attribute. The response does not record any environmental conditions, so the record environmental conditions attribute is not earned. The response earned 3 attributes. Let's take a look at response D. 1. Plant 3 salmonberry plants in the same size pots. 2. Give 1 plant no light, the second plant 3 hours of light a day, and the third plant 10 hours of light a day. 3. After 2 weeks, count the number of salmonberries on each plant and record. 4. Repeat steps 1 through 3 2 times using a new set of plants each time. First, we look for 3 conditions of the independent or manipulated variable. Response D has 3 conditions of an independent or manipulated variable. Hours of light. Unfortunately, it is an incorrect independent or manipulated variable. In addition, the dependent or responding variable, number of salmonberries, is also incorrect. The student did not plan an appropriate procedure for the given question, and the response may not earn any of the possible attributes. See General Note 1. At this time, pause the video, read through the rest of the student responses. Use the rubric and responses A, B, C, and D as guides to assign each sample student response an attribute total. Check your answers. If you're working in a group, take some time to compare your decisions. Then, let's look at the student responses to see how each paper was scored. Let's take a look at response E. You have already read through all of these, so we will go straight to scoring. The response earns 0 points. This response is a prediction, but does not include any steps of a procedure to test that prediction, so General Note 1E applies, and none of the attributes can be earned. It is acceptable for a student to start their new procedure by stating a prediction or a hypothesis, and then giving the steps needed to test that prediction. We know that teachers may require that in their classrooms, and that this approach may help the students start their thinking. The inclusion of a prediction does not cause the loss of points. The issue here is that the only thing that was written was a prediction. When the prediction is the entire response, then the result is a score of 0. Response F earns 3 attributes. This response includes 2 conditions of the independent or manipulated variable in step 1 with 100 inches of rain and in step 3 with 200 inches of rain. The conditions to be compared attribute is not earned, however we can continue to score the student's response. The data to be collected attribute is earned in step 2 with dependent or responding variable, mass of the berries. The method for collecting data attribute is earned in step 2 with the controlled variable 5 berries. The record measurements attribute is not earned. The observations are repeated attribute is earned in step 4 with repeat steps 1 through 3 each month. You'll notice that this step allows for more than 1 observation for all conditions. However, the way this statement is written gives no end to the experiment. This will cause the student to not earn the logical steps attribute. The record environmental conditions attribute is not earned in this response. In step 1, the student wrote, record the environmental conditions. However, a local environmental condition must be identified to earn the attribute. Response G earns 7 attributes. The conditions to be compared attribute is earned with 3 conditions of the independent or manipulated variable in step 1 with 35 inches, 45 inches, and 55 inches of rainfall. The data to be collected attribute is earned in step 5 with the dependent or responding variable, mass of the salmonberries. The method for collecting data attribute is earned in step 4 with the controlled variable, 5 meter by 5 meter plot. The record measurements attribute is earned in step 5 with record. The observations are repeated attribute is earned with step 6, repeat steps 3 through 5 for plot 2 and plot 3, and with step 7, repeat steps 2 through 6 for the 45 and 55 inch areas. Both of these steps are required to account for more than 1 observation for all conditions of the manipulated or independent variable. The response earns the Record Environmental Conditions attribute in Step 2 with record location, date, and weather. The steps of this procedure are clear enough that we could follow the steps and get similar results to this student's results. Therefore, the response earns the Logical Steps attribute. Response H earns 5 attributes. The Conditions to be Compared attribute is correctly implied in Step 1 with 3 conditions of the independent or manipulated variable: 10 meters, 20 meters, and 30 meters of rainfall. The Data to be Collected attribute is correctly implied in Step 2 with the dependent or responding variable total mass of all the berries on each bush. However, this response includes an attribute list at the beginning that incorrectly identifies the manipulated variable as the total mass of berries on a bush and the responding variable as inches of rain. According to General Note 2, when a bulleted attribute is named and implied in the response, both must be correct to be credited. Therefore, the Conditions to be Compared and the Data to be Collected attributes are not earned. The response earns the Method for Collecting Data attribute in Step 3 with same locations, same bushes, and same day of the year. These controlled variables are not contradicted by the controlled variables named at the top of the response. The Record Measurements attribute is earned in Step 2 with Write Down. The Observations are Repeated attribute is earned in Step 3 with Repeat Steps 1 and 2 for 3 more years. The Record Environmental Conditions attribute is earned in Step 1 with Record the Date. The steps of this procedure are clear enough that we could follow the steps and get pretty similar results to the student, so the Logical Steps attribute is earned. Response I earns 6 attributes. The independent or manipulated variable can be found in a combination of steps. In Step B, the student records the rainfall for a chosen location. In Step D, the student returns to the same location and records the rainfall again. And in Step F, the student returns to that same location for 2 more years and records the rainfall. Although actual values for rainfall are not specified, this attribute is creditable as it is reasonable to assume that there will be at least 3 different amounts of rainfall in the 4 years. This response earns the Conditions to be Compared attribute. The Data to be Collected attribute is earned in Step C with the dependent or responding variable mass all the berries on each plant, or Step E, mass of the berries for each. The Method for Collecting Data attribute is earned with controlled variables in Steps A and E with tags 15 salmonberry plants and use the same 1 through 15 plants. The response earns the Record Measurements attribute in Steps C, E, or G with Record. The Observations are Repeated attribute is earned because the student records the mass of the berries on 15 different salmonberry plants for 4 years of the experiment. This amounts to 15 trials. The Record Environmental Conditions attribute is not earned. The steps of this procedure are clear enough that we could follow the steps and get similar results to the student, so the Logical Steps attribute is earned. Response J earns 0 attributes. This response is a copy of the scenario. See General Note 1A. This brings us to the end of our training. Here are links to the assessment documents mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. If you have any questions or comments concerning the Biology EOC, please contact Don Cope, Secondary Science Assessment Specialist at 360-725-4989 or email dawn.cope@k12.wa.us. If you have any questions or comments concerning the Biology COE, please contact Scott Killow, COE Science Assessment Specialist at 360-725-6316 or email scott.killoughg@k12.wa.us. Thank you for your participation.